Hello, friends. The 1266th day of the war between Russia and Ukraine continues. Yesterday, Ukrainian military telegram channels, as well as fighters of the armed forces of Ukraine, began writing en masse about the Russian breakthrough north of the Pokrovsk agglomeration towards Zaporizhzhia. The first to report on the Russian breakthrough of the Ukrainian defense between Pokrovsk and Kostiantynivka was the military telegram channel Deep State. According to it, in the Zaporizhzhia area, Russian troops broke through the front to a depth of more than 11 kilometers, discovering weak spots in the defense of the armed forces of Ukraine. The advance was made possible by constant pressure and the numerical superiority of the infantry. Russian forces entered Kucherev Yar and Zaloty Kolodiaz, where they are accumulating to exploit their success, and are also gaining a foothold in Vesely. At the same time, Russia is advancing toward the Zaporizhzhia-Kramatorsk highway, gaining a foothold in the areas of Novovodiany and Petrovka. Some Ukrainian military telegram channels write that the highway has already been cut. The situation is complicated by the fact that a number of new engineering and fortification structures in the area of Zaloty Kolodiaz and Shohovi, built with high-quality positions and barriers, remain without sufficient personnel and may be occupied by Russian forces. According to the military, in this case, it will be extremely difficult to dislodge them from there. Deep State believes that, having consolidated themselves in the occupied settlements, the Russians will try to move deeper into the territory, and drone crews will also be pulled in, which will complicate the restructuring of alternative logistics and the holding of surrounding positions for the defense forces. With such a development of events, if it does not change, we may come across the fact that Zaporizhzhia will fall faster than Pokrovsk, Deep State states. The telegram channel also writes that the command of one of the brigades, which holds the defense in this area, is sending distorted information about the real situation to the top. Judging by the reports of Ukrainian telegram channels, the possibility of a breakthrough arose due to problems with a shortage of personnel and false reports to the top about the state of defense near Zaporizhzhia. Russian military telegram channels write that this area was covered by territorial defense since more experienced units hold the front near Pokrovsk. At the same time, as we see, the battles are already taking place in a fairly deep rear, where there is no organized line of defense of the armed forces of Ukraine. It must actually be built on the fly, transferring reserves. In Ukrainian telegram channels, there are already forecasts that if the situation is not urgently corrected, the Russians will be able to break through the front and reach operational space. And Ukraine will lose territory at the rate of hundreds of square kilometers per day, as it did in the first weeks of the invasion. Potentially, Russia's breakthrough to Zaporizhzhia carries two very serious threats to the armed forces of Ukraine at once. Firstly, this is the entry of Russian troops into the rear of the agglomeration of Kostiantynivka-Druzhkivka, Kramatorsk-Sloviansk. This is the largest fortified area of Ukrainian troops, ready to repel a Russian offensive from the east. But if it is bypassed from the west and communications are cut, then it will be extremely difficult to defend it. Russian telegram channels write that the goal is to reach Barvinkovy in the Kharkiv region in order to completely destroy the logistics of the Ukrainian armed forces in the north of the Donetsk region, which will be a prologue to the complete capture of this part of the region by the Russians. The second threat is a Russian attack in the western direction, through Zaporizhzhia to Pavlograd in the Dnipropetrovsk region. Now, this is still the rear of the Ukrainian armed forces, and it is unknown whether there is a reserve line of defense there. However, both maneuvers, both to the north to Barvinkovy, which is another 40 kilometers, and to the west to Pavlograd require two conditions. The first is the presence of sufficient reserves in Russia to ensure continuous and increasing pressure, while simultaneously pulling up the flanks. The second is the lack of sufficient reserves in the Ukrainian armed forces to stop the breakthrough. So far, these are two unknown quantities. Officially, the Ukrainian armed forces state that, at the moment, in the Zaporizhzhia area, there is no breakthrough with the enemy consolidating new positions, but there is only the infiltration of small groups of infantry and sabotage and reconnaissance groups, which are being destroyed by Ukrainian troops. A number of Russian military telegram channels also write that it is too early to talk about a breakthrough, it is still necessary to consolidate the position. They also write that the Ukrainian armed forces are already transferring reserves to stop the breakthrough. True, in Russia there is another version that Kiev is accumulating reserves in a completely different place on the border with the Kursk and Bryansk regions to organize a new breakthrough of the border with the aim of strengthening negotiating positions, and troops are sent to Donbass on a residual basis. In general, the coming days will show whether the Russians will be able to develop their offensive, going deeper into the rear of the Ukrainian army and collapsing the Ukrainian front, or the armed forces of Ukraine will be able to stop their advance by organizing a stable defense. In any case, a breakthrough to Zaporizhzhia is a serious blow to the northern flank of Pokrovsk and Myrnorod. The defense of the Ukrainian army is stretched here, which increases the likelihood of a breakthrough by the Russians in this area. Russian telegram channels claim that such a breakthrough is already happening, and that Russian troops, advancing from Rodensky, have reached Yevhenii to the northwest of Pokrovsk, which would mean an almost complete encirclement of the city. But Ukraine has not confirmed a breakthrough to Yevhenii. On the deep state map, this settlement is located in the rear of the armed forces of Ukraine. In the West, assessments of what happened sound extremely alarming. In the coming hours, the fate of the 29% of the Donetsk region that remains under Ukrainian control will be decided, says Bild military observer Julian Rupp. According to Rupp, the Ukrainian armed forces have several days to repel the threat of the Sloviansk-Kramatorsk agglomeration before Russia deploys drones and mechanized units there to secure and hold the occupied area. In this case, the last two major cities of Donbass, Sloviansk and Kramatorsk, will be cut off from the Dnipro, and will only be able to receive supplies through Kharkiv. And Ukraine is unlikely to be able to hold the region in the long term. If the breakthrough is not eliminated, the chain of two sparse sections of the front and further losses of territory will continue and accelerate, and Russia may withdraw its condition for the withdrawal of the Ukrainian army from Donbass in exchange for a ceasefire in other places, writes Rupp. The head of the Come Back Alive Foundation, Taras Siechmut, writes in connection with the breakthrough that Ukraine may again, like in 2022, start losing hundreds of kilometers every day. According to him, the situation that is currently happening in Donbass is a consequence of actions or inactions that have been warned about in every interview for the past year and a half. First, we fail at the platoon level. Then the company. Then it's the turn of the battalions. When it comes to the brigades, the enemy will use its armored groups, which have been actively accumulating for a year, and will go to the rear, to the operational space. And the map will shift again, as it did in 2022 by tens, hundreds of square kilometers every day, wrote Siechmut. Of course, you can say that I am exaggerating and winding up, and everything is not so bad. We have drones, about 24 newly created corps, and everything is under control. But we went through the same thing somewhere from 2018 to 2022. We are going through the same thing again somewhere from 2024. Ignoring problems does not lead to their solution, he added.
Friends, I want to develop and strive for higher quality content, but my 2009 computer does not allow me to do this. If you have the opportunity to help me buy a new computer and make my dream come true, I will be very grateful to you. You will find the link in the description under the video and in the pinned comment. Thank you very much and see you in the next video.